And we are back, coming to you live from the Parliament building in downtown Castries. A sitting of the House of Assembly is scheduled for today, Tuesday the 4th of May 2021, with papers to be laid by the Honourable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service, as well as Honourable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs. The House will also consider a motion for Parliament to further extend the state of emergency. As you're aware, we're currently under a state of emergency that is set to expire on the 16th of May. The proposed extension now is for an additional period of 5 months, commencing from the 17th day of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 2021 in accordance with the legislation. We do have most of the parliamentary representatives now seated. The members for Miku North and South, member for Babonneau, member for Labrie. We have the member for Souffrefonds Saint-Jacques, member for Ancillary Canaries. We have the member for Dennery North and South, Castries South, also Vieux-Fort North. We also have the member for Castries East present, just seated, waiting for the entrance of the Speaker of the House to begin today's proceedings. We invite you to stay tuned for today's proceedings. As I indicated earlier, a motion will be forwarded in the Honourable House, among other business, to extend the state of emergency to the 16th of October 2021. And now the entrance of the Speaker of the House.
Let us pray.
Good morning, friends. To trust is to believe in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of something. So when it comes to trusting God, by means in believing in His reliability, His word, His ability, and His strength, the Bible says God cannot lie, and that He always keeps His promises. Promises that He loves you and has something good in store for you. Trusting in Him means believing what He says about Himself, about the world, and about you is true. Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone King reigns and princes decree justice, and from whom alone comes all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thine unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and to guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we have in thy fear always before our eyes, laying aside all private interest, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity one towards another. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and forevermore. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. I have received word from the member for Castries North, who has indicated that he will be late. Honorable members, you've also received in a package on your desk 2 documents. One is Preventing Sexual Harassment, Exploitation and Abuse Policy and Code of Conduct of Parlamentary. Many of you here have attended functions organized by Parlamentary, of which St. Lucia is a board member. This policy code of conduct is a document that Parlamentary is adopting to fight sexual harassment. Honorable members, I'd ask you to take the opportunity to read the document and so provide feedback if you do believe you should. You will recall that our Parliament conducted or undertook the CPA benchmark test, and many of you here contributed to participated in that exercise, including the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition. You have a copy of the report from CPA indicating the findings and the way forward. Members, I urge you to read this document, provide your feedback, especially if you can do so in writing. Parliament of St. Lucia must reply to this report in the shortest possible time. Statements. Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg the indulgence of the House that I could today recognize the 25-year relationship that the government of St. Lucia has had with the people in the government of Japan. Speaker, we would all be aware of the considerable contribution that the Japanese government through JICA have made to the government and the people of St. Lucia. And most recently, Mr. Speaker, we have the JICA bridge, which has taken place in cul-de-sac, which is predominantly a grant facility from that government. So I would hope that all members would support in recognizing their contribution to St. Lucia and to congratulate them. And on a personal note, Mr. Speaker, you know, we all first owe our gratitude to the good Lord for us being here today. But very close and second behind that is a person's family and support. So I just want to officially recognize my wife and to thank her for being married to me for 19 years today. So again, it's not often that one could take advantage of a public forum like this to express my gratitude to her for her tremendous support and what she has done, not only for me, but for my family and for many other people. So I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Youth Development and Sports.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government of St. Lucia, through the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, held fruitful discussions with the St. Lucia Football Association Incorporated, the SLFA Inc., over the concern of the non-participation of of St. Lucia in the 2021 FIFA World Cup qualifiers, and to chart a way forward for football in St. Lucia. The government of St. Lucia is cognizant that Article 17 of the FIFA statutes clearly highlights each member shall manage its affairs independently and with no influence from third parties, and does not want to be in contravention. However, the ministry and the government fully understands the pivotal role it has to play in providing an enabling environment for the development of football as a sport and for the wider human society. Forging ahead, it was agreed that the relationship between the government of St. Lucia through the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports and the SLFA Inc. will be strengthened through the re-establishment of the Football Task Force, which was organized a couple years ago, comprising the government, the Ministry of Sports, the SLFA Inc., business partners, private sector, and independent individuals. The task force will be charged with the responsibility of suggesting ways in which the relationship between the SLFA Inc., the footballers, and the general public can be strengthened through the ultimate goal of restoring confidence and making football a more exciting and beautiful game. It is expected that the task force in the coming years, in the coming years would be on playing a lot more games through a two-tier structure, including relegation and promotion. Therefore, it is anticipated that with this new shift, football in St. Lucia can move towards a semi-professional league system in accordance with international norms. The government of St. Lucia fully embraces this global idea and has pledged to continue its infrastructure development program on some of our playing fields around the island. This would create the conducive environment to host local, regional, and international games on world-class facilities, thus facilitating and solidifying St. Lucia's place on the map as a lucrative sports tourism destination. I thank you.
Minister for Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just before I begin my statement, permit me, Mr. Speaker, to thank God for the opportunity to be here this morning, to be able to deliver this address. Things could have been very different, but I really thank God that I am here today. This is a statement from the Ministry of Economic Development, Transport and Civil Aviation under the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project. It reads, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia is vulnerable to climate change and intense extreme weather and climate events, such as heavy rainfalls, strong winds, drought, and high sea temperatures and levels. These and other events have claimed lives, caused severe damage to infrastructure and other economic assets, in addition to adversely impacting livelihoods. Importantly, these changes and these adverse consequences attributable to climate change are projected to escalate. As a result of this, St. Lucia signed a financing agreement on July 16, 2014, and on July 19, 2017, with the International Development Association, IDA, Strategic Climate Investment Fund, SCF Pilot Program for Climate Resilience. And the European Union for the financing of the St. Lucia Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project. All of the funds are channeled through the World Bank. The DVRP became effective on September 30th, 2014, with original financing of $68 million US, and the original closing date of December 31st, 2019. These agreements were subsequently amended to allowing the extension of the project closing date to 15th December 2021. The project seeks to measurably reduce vulnerability to natural hazards and climate change events, and is also implemented in Dominica, Grenada, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The additional financing on July 19, 2017, raised the availability funding for the project to approximately $76.04 million US, which consists of the following: IDA funds US $42.62 million US, SCF grants US $12 million, SCF loan US $15 million, European Union grant 5.74 million euros or 6.42 million US equivalent. The DVRP, Mr. Speaker, includes 5 components, namely Component 1, risk reduction and adaptation measures to support the structural and non-structural flood and landslide risk reduction interventions and climate adaptation measures to improve the country's resilience against current and future climatic shocks. Component 2, the technical assistance. Component 2, technical assistance for improved assessment and application of disaster and climate risk information in decision making, to support capacity building for open systems and platforms to create, share, and analyze the use of disaster risk and climate change data and information for improved decision making and engineering designs for risk reduction and climate adaptation. Component 3, Climate Adaptation Financing Facility, or what we call the CAF, designed to establish financing mechanisms to incentivize preemptive climate adaptation through the provision of retail loans to households and businesses. Sub-loans would finance climate adaptation activities to build resilience to assets and livelihoods. Component 4, Contingent Emergency Response Component, or the CERC as we call it. This provisional component allows for rapid recategorization and reallocation of project financing from other project components to cover emergency response and recovery costs associated with a natural catastrophe. The CERC was triggered in March 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that is what was used for the retrofitting of the Victoria Hospital as a respiratory hospital. Component 5, project management and implementation support to finance activities required for effective project management and implementation through the provision of technical advisory services, staffing, training, operating costs, and acquisition of goods. At the midterm of the project implementation, in December of 2016, an in-depth restructuring exercise was undertaken, thereby aligning project activities with the national strategic plan of this government. There was no change to the financing agreement with the European Union, which provided funding for the reconstruction of the PI Bridge and the reconstruction of the Vanna Venus to Ancillary Road. However, the other agreements were restructured to allow the reallocation of funds to support drainage activities in communities, ancillary, canneries, Soufre, Choiseul, Micoud, Dennery, and Castries Southeast, and the construction of community centers, schools, and health facilities. In so doing, the Department of Economic Development, Transport, and Civil Aviation engaged competent technical experts to prepare and finalize detailed designs based on acceptable international standards. By December 31st, 2019, the original closing date of the DVRP, significant progress had been made, which resulted in the World Bank granting an extension to the project. This was necessary so that the project development objectives could be fully realized. The Department of Economic Development, Transport, and Civil Aviation continued to focus on the implementing activities identified as priority investments. There has been major achievements and significant growth implementation of activities under the DVRP in 2020-2021, with activities valued at approximately $45.8 million being contracted. This is in keeping with the major increase in the level of funds committed under the project over the past 5 years. In June of 2016, the level of funds committed under the DVRP was $24.33 million EC dollars. However, by February 2021, the figure had increased to $130.75 million EC dollars, or more than 5 times the amount committed up to June 2016. In keeping with the increased level of activity, the expenditure on DVRP in 2021 amounted to $86.57 million across the 5 components as follows. Component 1, 53.61, Component 2, 47.03, Component 3, 4.5, Component 4, 11 million, and Component 5, 10.41 million. As of March 31st, 2021, the implementation rate increased from 42.4% of activities. Let me read this again. As of March 31st, 2021, the implementation rate increased with a 42.4% of activities being closed and 31.2 activities under, or 31.2% of activities under implementation. The remaining 26.4% of activities are in the planning stages. The DVRP has a total of 175 activities. By December 2019, the number of contracts signed was 214. The figure increased to 276 contracts signed by April 30th, 2021. And if I may add, Mr. Speaker, every one of these projects, or 99% of these projects except that of the CIRC, went through the tender, competitive bidding tender process. Mr. Speaker, if I was to just give a synopsis, Component 1, as of June 2016, was at 15% implementation. In February of 2021, we are at 64%, an increase of 339.3% implementation. Component 2 was at 5% in June of 2016. It is at 80% in February of 2021, an increase of 1,519.5%. Component 3, as of June 2016, implementation was at 0. It is at 54% as of February 2021. Component 4 was at 0% in June of 2016. It is at 87% in February of 2021. And component 5 was at 26% in 2016, and in 2021 it's at 82%. If we were to take an average, there was a 13% implementation as of 2016, and in 2021 we are at 68% implementation of DVRP. Some of the milestone achievements of the DVRP in 2021. Works were completed in 42 out of the 47 drainage work packages in Castries Southeast, in particular Bexar and MAC. And Mr. Speaker, in dealing with DVRP and disaster vulnerability reduction, we have seen the dividends in that while other places are flooding, we have been fortunate in the Bexar community that we've had no major flooding during the heavy rains. This equates to approximately 1,589 meters of drains and 459 direct beneficiaries. These are contractors who are engaged in these projects. Works were completed in 15 out of the 19 drainage packages in Mikud South. This equates to approximately 3,684 meters of drains and 764 direct beneficiaries. These are, apart from the contractors, people who are engaged in works in this drainage package in Mikud. Additionally, 3 out of the 5 drainage works projects were completed in Dennery South. And you would see, Mr. Speaker, between the playing fields in Dennery South, the extent of the work being done by the DVRP in that area. Contracts awarded for retrofitting of select priority emergency shelters, the PI Community Center, and the retrofitting of select priority emergency shelters is the Roblo Community Center. Works to start in May because they have both gone through the tender process and the contracts have been awarded. So we are expecting work to begin on both PI and Roblo Community Center during this month of May. Contract awarded for the supply of a centralized core banking system for the St. Lucia Development Bank. The bidding process was launched for the following contracts to be awarded in the first quarter of this fiscal year 2021-2022. The Dennery Polyclinic, and Mr. Speaker, we had to redo the Dennery Polyclinic because the designs after construction started, the consultant indicated that the designs were not acceptable and would not proceed. And so we had to go back and redesign, and the Dennery Polyclinic is now out for tender, and we would expect that during this first quarter, work would begin. So that's the Dennery Polyclinic. The PI Bridge reconstruction, which is an EU-funded activity, is out for tender as we speak. The Vanna Venus to Ancillary Road, EU-funded activity, that is out for tender. Equipment for the rehabilitation of the hydrometeorological observation network remaining packages. And you would see, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of places where we are monitoring flooding, and you would see the meters once it begins to read the level of the water in these areas. There's also an alarm system that is put in place where you can speak, like in the area of Viewfort, if there is going to be a sea surge, or there is a siren system, and also from the Nemo Center you can speak into the system and inform residents through a loudspeaker to be able to move to safer, higher grounds. Delivery of training and certification for at least 12 persons in coral reef gardening and restoration in St. Lucia. NEMO training in mass casualty management, community emergency response, and damage and needs assessment, and the NEMO information system. And we did just a short handing over just a few weeks ago with NEMO, and NEMO has now one of the most advanced communication systems in the region, funded under the DVRP project, Mr. Speaker. Restructuring of the Climate Adaptation Financing Facility, what we call the CAF, to respond to COVID-19 pandemic through the launch of the Business Recovery Program. And that was one of the things that was triggered, Mr. Speaker, quickly to allow small businesses impacted by COVID to be able to get some grant financing and loan to keep their businesses afloat. So the CAF Business Recovery Program was launched in November of 2020 through the repurposing of some of the financing under the DVRP. The BRP, which is the Business Recovery Program, provides blended loan grant support to medium and small micro enterprises with a focus on business continuity and recovery from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and also climate resiliency. Additionally, during the fiscal year, sizable CAF loan was approved for a local private sector enterprise involved in the collection, processing, storage, and sale of seafood from local and international consumption. The project includes the implementation of solar PV systems in Castries and Viewfort to further enhance the company's energy sustainability. The DVRP Contingent Emergency Response, Component 4 of the project, was successfully triggered in response to the current and anticipated impact of COVID-19 pandemic in St. Lucia in accordance with the financing agreement with IDA Credit 5493. The DVRP CERC was triggered along with the CERC in the Health System Strengthening Project, which focused on medical supplies and equipment. Triggering the CERC was possible through further restructuring of project activities, prioritization and reallocation of funds, from within the project to meet COVID-19 expenditures approved by the World Bank in an action plan. The statement made by Prime Minister Chastanet in March of 2020, and I quote, "The impact of coronavirus should be treated as an imminent disaster like a hurricane." And declaration made by the World Health Organization, COVID-19, a pandemic, made it feasible to trigger the CIRC and pay for COVID-related expenses up to $5.5 million US. The DVRP CIRC was approved to undertake the following: increase healthcare through the establishment of dedicated respiratory clinics and isolation wings through construction, rehabilitation, retrofitting works, and provision of rainwater harvesting systems at specific health facilities, including Victoria Hospital, Grozile Polyclinic, OKEU General Hospital, and the St. Jude Hospital. Support to primary health care through the scaling up of surveillance by procuring information technology, IT software, solutions, and acquisition of emergency communication systems. Activities to support National Emergency Management Office, NEMO, and agency critical in St. Lucia's COVID-19 response, and secretariat to the NEMAC. Scaling up of public education and awareness campaigns, and desilting of rivers and drains in preparation for the upcoming hurricane season. So contrary to what has been said, that it's just a coat of painting that we put at Victoria Hospital, the World Bank gave great praises to St. Lucia for the implementation of the CIRC project at the Victoria Hospital. Achievements under the CIRC funded disbursement within 7 weeks of government request to trigger the CIRC, US $4,920,174.28 and US $5,515,132. A total commitment of 89% committed between April 2020 and April 2021. Significant project milestones, Mr. Speaker. All civil works activities under Component 1 are either constructed or in the planning stages to be contracted by July 2021. Funding under the component represents approximately 60% of the total funds. These activities include investment funded by the European Union and other key milestone activities such as the Roblo Community Center, the Dennery Polyclinic, a national priority EMAC to serve as a respiratory facility for the eastern part of the country. Designs were outstanding and caused the delay in the project implementation, but now that is completed. Significant improvement in defining activities and implementation of Component 2. During the extension period of January 2020, 6 activities progressed from the request phase to the procurement of the implementation phase, and commitments increased from 62 to 80%. In addition, some activities were transitioned to Component 4 under the CIRC. Mr. Speaker, challenges related to COVID-19 pandemic have and will continue to impact implementation of the DVRP. These impacts are expected to have implications for the successful completion of the project by the current closure date of December 15, 2021. In addition to these achievements of the national priorities and the project result framework indicators for disaster risk reduction would also be impacted. And Mr. Speaker, the reason why we are giving this report is because we promised the people of St. Lucia that what we could do, we would inform them, and what we could not do, we will also take the responsibility to inform them. So COVID has caused a problem for us. The temporary closure of construction sites and increased social distancing protocols on all sites, limiting the number of persons who are able to work on project sites, thereby slowing down the progress in construction. Example of a critical work activity impacted is the Mikud Wellness Center. And that is one of the projects that's en route to completion as we speak. And I expect we'll be doing the ribbon cutting very soon. The project was redesigned to cover multiple component hazards of COVID-19, drought and hurricane preparedness during the fiscal year. Therefore, the original project design had to cater for varying complexities emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic. This led to delays in the completion of the works at the Victoria Hospital, which was rehabilitated to serve as a dedicated respiratory facility, as the specialized equipment was not available in country and had to be sourced internationally. Moreover, these items, including UV lights, ventilators, were also in high demand globally from limited suppliers. Delays due to closure of the border between March, thank you. Delays due to the closure of the border between March and June 2020, coupled with a 2-week mandatory quarantine period for international arrivals from most countries following the reopening of the borders. This restricted travel and participation of firms and suppliers in the bidding process, thereby reducing competition and stalling the completion that had been commenced. Prominent examples of these impacts include limited competition in bidding process for the development of the millet water intake within the John Compton Dam raw water supply system. A declaration of force majeure by international service providers from the LADE, and image data collection and processing, and the assessment of the hydro and hydraulic conditions of Dennery Village and Soufre. This was addressed by extending the implementation timeline and proposing initiating alternative means of facilitating implementation, and delayed by a year of the installation of the tide gauge for Dennery, Soufre, and Viewfort, as the firms from the United Kingdom could not travel here. Compliance with highlighted protocols and social distance regime required the implementation of flexible work sites and hours, delivery of services remotely, telecommuting, and alternative means of meetings. Flexible hours of work and rotation of staff, reduction in working hours, work from home, introduction of virtual technologies for team meetings and delivery of services. These measures resulted in lower productivity and caused disruptions in internal operations, including the various tender board meetings and beneficiary agencies. Low productivity due to global shutdowns and the reduced working time. Impacts on supply chain, including escalation of market prices. An example of this was the inability of the construction sector to source major construction materials, including lumber, from the customary South American markets. This resulted in increased prices as suppliers were forced to venture into new markets in North America. Based on the foregoing, an analysis has been carried out on the associated risk and impact of COVID-19, and a request has been made to the World Bank for another extension of the DVRP, and the preliminary indications are that the World Bank is in the process of considering an extension for the project by 24 months. The risk mitigation strategy will focus mainly on the impacts of COVID-19 and any foreseen implementation challenges as very few activities remain at this stage of procurement for technical requirement developments. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have given in today a comprehensive report of the implementation of the DVRP project, the challenges that we have faced, but I also want to place on the record my thanks and appreciation to the DVRP team and the team at the various ministries who have collaborated to see to it that we could achieve such a high rate of implementation that the World Bank is now considering giving us the additional time to complete the remaining projects. I thank you.
Papers.
Speaker, I'd like to lay the following papers. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 67 of 2021, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Prohibition of Assembly Number 4 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 68 of 2021, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Physical Distancing Number 4 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 70 of 2021, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule Number 6 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 71 of 2021, National Savings and Development Bonds Act, Resolution of Parliament to raise funds by the issue of savings bonds.
Minister for Physical Plan.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lay the following paper in the name of the Minister for Commerce, Industry, Enterprise, Development and Consumer Affairs. Statutory Instrument Number 69 of 2021, Price Control Amendment Number 6 Order.
Motions. Honorable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'd like to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 17(1) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, that the Governor General may, by proclamation, which shall be published in the Gazette, declare that the state of emergency exists for the purpose of Chapter 1 of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101. And whereas it is further provided by Section 17(3) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, that the declaration of emergency shall elapse. A, in the case of a declaration made when Parliament is sitting, at the expiration of a period of 7 days beginning with the date of publication of the declaration, and B, in the case at the expiration of a period of 21 days beginning with the date of publication of the declaration. unless it has in the meantime been approved by resolutions of the Senate and the House. And whereas it is further provided by Section 17(6) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap. 101, that a resolution of the Senate or the House passed for the purposes of Section 17 shall remain in force for 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified in the resolution. And B, a resolution under paragraph A may be extended from time to time by a further such resolution, each extension not exceeding 12 months from the date of the resolution affecting the extension, and such resolution may be revoked at any time by a further resolution. And whereas the Governor General by proclamation declared a state of emergency that was published in the Gazette on the 3rd day of February 2021 as statutory instrument number 27 of 2021, containing a declaration that a public emergency has arisen as a result of the occurrence of 2019 COVID, an infection disease commonly known as COVID-19. And whereas the declaration of emergency is made when Parliament is sitting and will expire at the end of a period of 7 days beginning with the date of publication of the declaration, unless the declaration is approved by resolution of the Senate and the House. And whereas Parliament approved the declaration of a state of emergency that was published in the Gazette on the 3rd day of February 2021 as statutory instrument number 27 of 2021, containing a declaration that a public emergency has arisen as a result of the occurrence of 2019 COVID, an infectious disease commonly known as COVID-19, for a further period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 21 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021, by the Constitution of St. Lucia. Resolution of Parliament approving declaration of state of emergency passed as statutory instrument number 38 of 2021. And whereas it is necessary to further extend for an additional period of 5 months, commencing from the 17th day of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 2021, in accordance with the Section 17(6) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap. 101, the Constitution of St. Lucia, resolution of Parliament approving declaration of state of emergency passed as statutory instrument number 38 of 2021, that extended the state of emergency for an additional period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 21, ending on the 16th day of May of 2021. Be it resolved that the Parliament further extends for an additional period of 5 months, commencing from the 17th day of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 21, in accordance with Section 17(6) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap. 101, the Constitution of St. Lucia, resolution of Parliament approving declaration of state of emergency passed as statutory instrument number 38, 2021, that extended the state of emergency for an additional period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021. Mr. Speaker, since the declaration of the 2019 novel coronavirus, an infectious disease, as we now know, called COVID-19, as a global pandemic by the World Health Organization in March of 2020, St. Lucia, just like several other countries in the Caribbean and indeed the wider international community, has experienced various peaks and valleys with respect to its domestic COVID situation. We've seen a cycle of curfews and relaxation of restrictions as we seek to strike the best balance between protecting lives and safeguarding livelihoods. The measures that we are taking are not unique in St. Lucia, as we know that even some of the most developed countries, such as France, England, Canada, are still in their third lockdown. In the case of England, their lockdown began in January of this year and is not expected to be eased before the 21st of June 2021, contingent on what the situation reveals at that time. Closer to home, our sister Caribbean islands of Barbados, Martinique, and Trinidad have all recently had to extend and tighten restrictions as they try to bring the surge in COVID-19 cases under control. All around the globe, this situation with regard to COVID-19 remains very fluid. Indeed, for no country has the management of this pandemic been easy, as there is no manual on COVID-19. Furthermore, the evolving nature of the virus with the constant emergence of new variants that are considered more transmissible and potentially more deadly only serve to further obscure an already complicated and complex situation. Nonetheless, I do believe that hope is on the horizon, particularly given the onset of the vaccination program. However, we will not effectively clear the hurdle until we have attained herd immunity, which requires approximately 70% of our population to be vaccinated. Having experienced a sharp increase in active COVID-19 cases at the onset of the new year, we felt it was essential to reinstitute the state of emergency to allow the necessary scope to respond expeditiously to the recurring threat of COVID-19, and in particular, curfews. Consequently, the Governor General by proclamation declared a state of emergency that was published in the Gazette on the 3rd day of February 2021 as statutory instrument number 27 of 2021, containing a declaration that a public emergency had arisen as a result of the occurrence of COVID-19 under the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 101, the Constitution. However, the Constitution also states that the declaration of emergency lapses in the case of a declaration made within Parliament is in sitting at the expiration of a period of 7 days beginning with the date of the publication of the declaration, unless it has, in the meantime, been approved by resolutions of the Senate and the House. Additionally, the Constitution provides that a resolution of the Senate or the House passed for the purposes of Section 17 remains in force for 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified in the resolution and may be extended by a further resolution, each extension not exceeding 12 months from the date of the resolution given effect to the extension. As a result, Parliament approved the declaration of state of emergency that was published in the Gazette on the 3rd day of February 2021 as statutory instrument number 27 of 21 for a further period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021 as statutory instrument number 38 of 2021. While I am sure that many persons have grown somewhat fatigued, just as I have, with the curb that this state of affairs brought by the pandemic has imposed on regular social life and movement, I am pleased to note that we have over the past 2 months seen a gradual decline in the number of active cases. As a consequence, we have begun the phased relaxation of restrictions. Further, I have on many occasions reiterated the importance of St. Lucia reopening our economy and getting our people back to work. Indeed, the interconnected nature of our economy with the international trade and travel makes this not only inevitable, but vital. However, we are conscious of the fact that we embark on that gradual relaxation of restrictions and further reopening of the economy, especially to more international travelers. Our vulnerability to a virus that is still raging will increase. Speaker, you remember that I've often made reference to a dimmer switch rather than to an on-off switch. And that practice continues. As we see COVID numbers decreasing, then we can increase the activities. As we see the COVID cases reducing, then we can increase the number of activities. One will remember that we passed the COVID Act, Mr. Speaker, in order to incorporate most of the protocols that we are using under legislation. The only aspect of the COVID protocols that cannot be done under the COVID Act, Mr. Speaker, is in fact the curfew. Curfew can only be instituted through a state of emergency. Those, as I said, vaccination offers great hope, and I am optimistic that we will effectively turn the corner and the page on the pandemic this year. We cannot yet let our guard down. Not until St. Lucia and indeed most other countries from which we receive tourists are much closer to achieving herd immunity. Through the contact tracing process, we note that the transmission of COVID-19 is greater during social activities. The state of emergency facilitates the imposition of the curfew, which curbs the nighttime socialization, documented to effectively control COVID-19 escalation. Undoubtedly, the current situation in Anguilla and India serve as a stark reminder of how quickly the situation can change and become dire. Certainly want to put on record again, Mr. Speaker, our gratitude to Prime Minister Modi, the people of India, for their donation of the vaccines. There is no better reminder of the extent of the generosity that was extended to not only St. Lucia, but many countries around the world. And it's heartbreaking to see the current situation in India. In fact, it's unimaginable, Mr. Speaker, when you hear of 400,000 cases in a day and over 3,000 deaths in one day. And certainly the pictures I'm sure all members of the House are seeing on TV are horrifying, and our hearts, our prayers, our best wishes go out to Prime Minister Modi and to the people of India during this very difficult situation. In that regard, in an effort to ensure the safety of the citizenry, the state of emergency needs to be extended to allow for and to provide for any change in the dynamics of the spread of the virus. Mr. Speaker, until we reach herd immunity, we will remain exposed to an outbreak. It does not take much to turn the corner. There remains a continuing threat to the health of the population. This will allow action to be taken with immediate dispatch on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer where there is a need to take essential and urgent measures. Again, Mr. Speaker, to remind members of the House, the Chief Medical Officer, along with her staff, sit on the command center. The command center reviews the statistics on a daily basis up to now, Mr. Speaker. And based on the advice provided to them, it comes to Cabinet. Cabinet, whenever there's any changes in protocols, brings it to NEMAC. NEMAC is a wider body of civil society, and when they choose to throw up the opposition, in order for us to discuss those protocols and to be able to make recommendations moving forward. As we speak right now, Mr. Speaker, the CMO has advised that the current state of protocols remain in place. And so there is no change in the protocols. And we are simply coming to Parliament, Mr. Speaker, to extend the state of emergency to allow us to implement a legal instrument to allow us to have a curfew. The 9 o'clock curfew, Mr. Speaker, while not ideal, has seemed to have satisfied and cured our current problem. It has allowed businesses to remain open, Mr. Speaker. In fact, government revenues have been increasing each month. But at the same time, we have not seen an increase in the number of cases. In fact, Mr. Speaker, last week we had about 47 cases for the entire week. So we want to be able to continue on the pattern we have, and we believe at this point that the 9 o'clock curfew has been ideal, not perfect, but certainly has found that balance between lives and livelihoods. So, Mr. Speaker, on this basis, the state of emergency is proposed to continue from the 17th of May, 2021 to the 16th of October, 2021. I thank you.
Honorable members, the question is that Parliament further extends for an additional period of 5 months, commencing from the 17th day of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 2021, in accordance with Section 17(6) of the Constitution of St. Lucia, Cap 1.01, the Constitution of St. Lucia, Resolution of Parliament, approving declaration of state of emergency, passed as statutory instrument number 48 of 2021, that extended the state of emergency for an additional period of 90 days, commencing from the 11th day of February 2021 and ending on the 16th day of May 2021. Member for Denry North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to all my parliamentary colleagues. Mr. Speaker, the honor is mine once again to rise in this honorable house to make a contribution on a matter of great national importance on behalf of the people of Denry North. Mr. Speaker, as has been the custom throughout my tenure, I want to preface my substantive contribution to the debate on the motion by extending condolences to a few families in my constituency that are dealing with the loss of loved ones. I also want to extend get well wishes to a number of constituents of mine who have not been well for some time and they are battling some serious health conditions. Also, Mr. Speaker, permit me to reach out this morning in this chamber to a political colleague and former Senator Joachim Henry, who yesterday laid his only begotten son to rest. It was a very painful exercise for the family and for those of us who were in attendance. And I just want to profit the opportunity, with your indulgence and that of colleagues, to reach out to the brother and ask him to keep strong, and it is our sincere hope that God will see him through this period of difficulty. Mr. Speaker, I waited for the statement on the other side in relation to International Firefighters Day, but I guess pretty much consistent with what we saw in the allocations for the fire service. It didn't come as a surprise that nobody remembered them by way of a statement, and so I want to, this morning, on behalf of the parliamentary opposition, on my own personal behalf, and on behalf of the beloved constituents of Denry North, Mr. Speaker, I want to reach out to the firefighters of our country, the hundreds of them, men and women, active as well as those retired, who have served and made sterling contributions to the development of our country through this noble and honorable field of endeavor. Mr. Speaker, I must mention Troy, Leroy, Willan, Eroff, and a few others who have served with distinction. Mr. Speaker, I take Parliament very, very seriously, and hence my impeccable record of attendance. I am never late, and to the best of my recollection, I have only missed one sitting of Parliament, and that was owing to government business overseas. Mr. Speaker, this morning I find myself in a very unusual situation where I even want to question the relevance of today's sitting. When you look at the substantive matters on the other paper, the Prime Minister has come here in the main, notwithstanding the few bills that have to be amended as indicated on the other paper. But in the main, to ask for parliamentary approval to extend the state of emergency. And for him, the underlying reason or the justification for seeking that extension is COVID management. Mr. Speaker, let me say this morning that this extension being sought in this House today has absolutely nothing to do with COVID management. But instead, this is a ploy for a failed government to buy extra time to finish projects and to try and gain favor with the electorate on the eve of elections. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister would have been in a better position today to come to this House and to ask for the House to be dissolved and give St. Lucians a date to go to the polls to decide which of the parties they want to govern the affairs of this country moving forward. You have presided over the affairs of this country for 5 years. 5 years. And you want to come in the chamber today to ask for an extension because of COVID? Mr. Speaker, all of the Caribbean jurisdictions that held elections last year did so during COVID. They did so during COVID. Why can't we do the same? But I understand that when you look at poll results and you realize you're not doing so well, and you need the extension, COVID is, Mr. Speaker, the way out. The Prime Minister said that with the current or existing legislation, the COVID Prevention and Control Bill, he does not, to paraphrase, have the latitude to be able to institute or apply a curfew. And that is correct, Mr. Speaker. But what do we need the curfew for? What do we need the curfew for? The time has come, Mr. Speaker, for the people to decide whom they want to preside over their affairs in this COVID environment. You said you have tried. You said, Mr. Speaker, that you have handled the situation in a manner that makes you the envy of the rest of the Caribbean and at one time the world. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that, and I know I run the risk of being misconstrued here this morning to make it seem as if I am insensitive to people who are vulnerable. I have said here, and I will say again, Mr. Speaker, that COVID affects everybody. My own family is not immune. My elderly mother is not immune. And there's nothing I would want to see more than for us to have a handle on COVID. But I am saying today, Mr. Speaker, that the request for an extension of the SOE, where the government is trying to buy an additional 5 months to roll out projects and to reclaim lost political ground, Mr. Speaker, cannot be right. And this is tantamount to an abuse of power. And when you look at cricket, if I were to use a cricket analogy, as I've been using in this House for some time now. Mr. Speaker, there are some rules that are on the cricket books, modes of dismissal. But it would be considered ungentlemanly for you to resort to some of those to get a batsman out. Mr. Speaker, yes, the Constitution makes provisions for the Prime Minister to extend the tenure of his government all the way to October. But is that necessary, Mr. Speaker? To what extent, Mr. Speaker, must we sit by and allow that blatant abuse of power, Mr. Speaker? The people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, are waiting to exhale.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Before you let me just speak to the honorable member that
Which one?
remember that the resolution is the extension of the state of emergency, It is not elections, neither is it where the government is extending or buying time for elections. So I'm just putting you on alert that in whatever submission you're making, remember we're dealing with the COVID-19 state of emergency extension and not the elections. Now,
Mr. Speaker, can I respond to you, and then you will take the point of order?
now I'm asking if you want to, very well, you may just respond.
But
you
Mr.
may just
Speaker,
continue. You may just continue.
Mr. Speaker, the state of emergency takes us beyond the 5-year anniversary for election. Is it not reasonable for me to infer, Mr. Speaker, that the government is buying more time?
There is no I do not want us, neither do I want, Honorable Prime Minister, I do not want to engage in what you say. But you have the right to infer to yourself in your private conversations and elsewhere, anything you so wish. No, I have no issue with that. No issue with that. But when we debating, remember we are guided by the standing orders. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the extension of the SOE is not the best thing for our country at this point in time. COVID-19 has brought about enough stress to the average citizen in this country. The average business has suffered sufficiently, Mr. Speaker. And as a result, our country is not at a place where it ought to be at a time when so many other jurisdictions in the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, are making strides as they emerge from the malaise of COVID. And Mr. Speaker, I am saying, Mr. Speaker, that this extension, notwithstanding all what is being said on the other side, that cannot be, Mr. Speaker, for COVID extension. And I remain steadfast in that stance. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, there is so much tension, Mr. Speaker, in this country today. We have seen what the lockdown and the restrictions placed on people can do. We have seen the social ills that have emanated from that, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying that we are treading down a very dangerous road when we look to impose more restrictions on an already frustrated population. And all over the country, every weekend, we are beginning to see that frustration manifesting itself. And I am saying, Mr. Speaker, because I am on the ground, not only in my constituency, but I move sufficiently through the length and breadth of this country to know, Mr. Speaker, that the people of this country have reached a certain degree of frustration as it relates, Mr. Speaker, to the extent to which their liberties are being infringed upon. And so I will say that notwithstanding all of what we've been told by way of COVID management, that cannot be a justification for the extension of this SOE. This is a government, Mr. Speaker, that has run out of time, and they are using COVID as a guise to buy more time, to finish programs, and to give themselves a chance at the elections. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my short submission to the debate on this particular motion.
Leader of the opposition. Oh yeah, you could do that. Just don't cross between myself and the speakers. No, just go this way. Yeah, you could do this way.
Mr. Speaker, good morning. It's a joke when 74 people have died from COVID in the country, the most deaths in the OECS, more deaths than Barbados. It's a joke, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's laughable when St. Lucia has more deaths than all the countries in the OECS combined. It's laughable, Mr. Speaker, when in terms of per capita, St. Lucia is possibly doing the worst in terms of per capita as far as the management of COVID is concerned. But, Mr. Speaker, today is the 4th of May 2021. The 6th of May 2021, in 1 month after the 6th of May, is going to be the 6th of June. The 6th of June, the people of the country voted 5 years ago on the 6th of June. And on the 6th of June next month, the elections of this country were 5 years ago. According to the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, the Parliament had held its first meeting, I think, on the 15th of July, and constitutionally, the Prime Minister has 90 days from the 15th of July to call general elections. So, Mr. Speaker, we could have come back here, back to this honorable house, any time between now and the 15th of July to make amendments to state of emergency legislation or motion. So we are coming, today is the 4th of May, we have up to the 15th of July to amend the the SOE legislation, but we are doing it 6 weeks before the 15th of July. It's up to you. The Parliament can meet up to the 15th of July. The Parliament can meet up to the 15th of July. The present state of emergency ends on the 16th of May. We could have come to this Parliament today and extend it till the end of June. We could have extended it to the end of June, but we are extending it until the middle of October. I'm just stating a fact. So it's up to conjecture that why are we doing it up to 5 months? This is a very simple question. Why do we up to 5? Why 5? That's all I'm saying. Why are we going up to 5 months when we could have gone up to 4 weeks and do it sometime if it is necessary? The government is assuming that it's going to be necessary until October. That is an assumption. That's all. The government's assumption. And it's up to conjecture for why are we assuming that we need the state of emergency until the 15th of October? Because it's reasonable to assume, because constitutionally the government can call elections by the middle of October. They are extending the state of emergency until October. This is the simple conjecture. And I'm saying to myself, Mr. Speaker, that there is no reason why you keep the country under that tension until October, when if the situation had got worse, there would be no need to extend the state of emergency. By the Prime Minister's own admission, the only thing the state of emergency does is that it can cause you to decide curfew hours. I want to bring you, Mr. Speaker, to Section 5 of SI 2021 number 68, and it says operation of business establishment or office, and it says when under the COVID Prevention and Control Act you can cause a business to open or close. Under Section 6, Mr. Speaker, under the sale and disposal of intoxicating liquor, it says that you can say the times under which you can sell intoxicating liquor. Under Section 6 of the COVID Prevention Control Act. So if the reason for the curfew is to stop people from gathering and to stop people from getting involved in selling of alcohol in restaurants, etc., all the government had to do was to decide on the hours based on the COVID-19 Prevention Control Act. Under Section 5 and Section 6, Mr. Speaker, the government could have decided that restaurants and liquor establishments have to be closed at a particular time. So it is left for us to ask the question, why until October? Why the 90 days? When COVID was at its worst, Mr. Speaker, we did not come to this Parliament for such a long extension. If I'm wrong, I can be corrected. When COVID was at its worst, we never came to Parliament to get such an extension for the period we're asking for it now. Why until October, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, there's a tendency, the country is restless. Restless from suffering.
Honorable members.
He's happy, Mr. Speaker. He's a very happy man. Life is good. Mr. Speaker, we never came to this Parliament for such a long extension when COVID was at its worst. If I'm wrong, you can correct me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to date, the country is under tremendous tension and stress because of COVID and because of other factors. Mr. Speaker, there is a tendency. This morning, I heard that the police were telling people, do not gather outside the Parliament. The country, Mr. Speaker, is taking a dangerous trend where, using the excuse of COVID, the police are being prompted, Mr. Speaker, to turn against the people. Mr. Speaker, and I want to warn the people of St. Lucia, do not get agitated, do not get tempted to get into conflict with the police, Mr. Speaker. Do not get into conflict with the police. There is one time the government can, at its best, with its best efforts, only cause a state of emergency until the middle of October. That is the constitutional date for elections. I want to let you be patient. You are being tempted, Mr. Speaker. You see the confrontation between people not wearing masks and wardens. Wardens have to go back to live in a society, Mr. Speaker. It's a kind of as if there is a deliberate, all the threats, Mr. Speaker, enforcement. You have to speak about enforcement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if when the COVID situation, Mr. Speaker, had been properly, if the education of people was proper, our people would have been in a better state of mind, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll give an example. When COVID started, Mr. Speaker, I said that the country was ill-prepared. My basis for saying that was based on the science. The science had said that there ought to be testing and there ought to be quarantine when people are infected with COVID. St. Lucia had absolutely no quarantine facilities at this time. We were speaking about quarantine at Rat Island. We had not started any serious testing, Mr. Speaker. As we speak, Barbados has effected 154,341 tests. 154,341 tests. The population is 1.5 times of St. Lucia. And Barbados only has 3,866 cases and 44 deaths. Barbados is more dependent on tourism than St. Lucia. 3,866 cases, 44 deaths, 154,341 tests, and 74,218 vaccinations. And for the last 2 days, there have been no positive tests in Barbados, Mr. Speaker. No wonder the Prime Minister thought he could have traveled to Barbados. And I wonder whether there were any quarantine or whether Barbados is in a special bubble for the Prime Minister. If there was quarantine when the Prime Minister returned from Barbados, whether he went on, whether he had a mandatory quarantine that all citizens have to do when they travel. Because I want to travel to Barbados too. I'd like to find out, Mr. Speaker, whether I can go to Barbados and return and not get quarantined. Mr. Speaker, this government insists in using COVID as a political football. They come to this honorable house and they scream success. You cannot argue success, Mr. Speaker. I warn them. They speak about when they said so. We said to them there are different variations of the COVID pandemic. You are speaking too quickly. You are talking too quickly. You are calling success too early, Mr. Speaker. When the issue gets to a situation that we are now, they blame everybody, Mr. Speaker. They blame everyone. They blame the people of St. Lucia. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that the government has mishandled, the government did not cause COVID, but they've mishandled the situation badly, Mr. Speaker. It's been mishandled. And that is why these are the results that we have, the comparative results, Mr. Speaker. Because what happens, Mr. Speaker, is that we do not come here and speak, anytime somebody speaks facts, the science, the figures, what you get is innuendo, bad talk, mépris, instead of dealing with the facts. The facts are, in terms of the figures, St. Lucia is doing the worst as far as COVID is concerned. Mr. Speaker, we speak about the respiratory hospital, and we came here and we said, the mayor for Castries South said the hospital had been repainted, and that was good. Instead of taking the compliment, this government, as usual, they tried to spin it in a political way, Mr. Speaker. Massive spin. Mr. Speaker, you know they even spin things. They even spin events that happen in churches, Mr. Speaker. But that's for another show. Mr. Speaker, you know there was a suicide at Victoria Hospital. And do you know, Mr. Speaker, do you know that we continue to laugh? A suicide. I came on several occasions in public and this honorable house. I've spoken about the horrors of self-isolation, Mr. Speaker. You know, as we speak at Victoria Hospital, people are self-isolated and there is no Wi-Fi, there is no TV. You are putting somebody, you're logging somebody in. If you can't afford to have your own minutes on your telephone, you have no Wi-Fi access in isolation, Mr. Speaker. And a government that has done so well for COVID could not cause something to happen with the people, with Flow and Digicel and other providers of Wi-Fi, to have some level of Wi-Fi at the hospital, or to have television, so that people will spend 2 weeks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, because we have not had the horror of spending 2 weeks, we laugh. That's a joke. We play politics, Mr. Speaker, because we've not suffered the 2 weeks. I've spoken to people who have spent 2 weeks at Victoria Hospital. I've spoken to them, Mr. Speaker. I've spoken to them. I've spoken to the nurses and the people who take care of them. And it's horrors, Mr. Speaker. It's a horrible thing. But this government laughs. It's politics. It's going on television and doing things and having all kind of programs just to belittle people, Mr. Speaker, because an election is nigh. Mr. Speaker,
Honorable Member,
I'm saying to you,
Honorable Member,
yes, sir.
Just remember the resolution. Please tie your
Mr.
presentation.
Speaker, thank you. Thank you.
Getting what is involved in what you're saying. I'm just saying to marry the two, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that the state of emergency is purporting to be for the control of COVID. And I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, that the state of emergency will not help if the conditions or if the government's policies as far as COVID is concerned continue. The state of emergency will not help, Mr. Speaker. It will not help, Mr. Speaker, because the government has not leveled as to what we're ready to do for COVID. One day is international travel. The government boasted that cruise ships will return in July. I heard. Again, I'm not like them, I'm not perfect. They are perfect, they never make mistakes, they are the best in everything. Nobody can cite them, they know everything, they are engineers, they are doctors, they are scientists, they are everything. They know everything, and at that side, the side of perfection. They are workers. I'm not perfect, Mr. Speaker. I heard that the CDC said that cruise tourism may not return until October. If I'm wrong, again, I stand corrected, Mr. Speaker. I also heard that the United States are not encouraging people to travel, international travel, even though they have gotten 2 doses of the vaccination. They are not encouraging international travel for the time being. They are not encouraging. Listen to what I said. I said they are not encouraging, Mr. Speaker. But the government continues to live on false hope. Tourism will be the best. We cannot do well. Reopening, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is false hope. The same government, speaking about COVID, Mr. Speaker, is the same government that is encouraging people to break the curfew hours, walking on 1.5 miles of road in Eardley Bay. What is the urgency of that, Mr. Speaker? You're speaking about social distancing and obeying the laws, but you have people walking on 1.5 miles of road all hours of the night. A road that has absolutely no... What is the urgency? What's the urgency, Mr. Speaker? If it was work on the hospital, I would have understood. What is the urgency of that work on the road? What's the urgency, Mr. Speaker, to have people breaking the curfew on that road? Mr. Speaker, that is why, Mr. Speaker, I am saying that the motive for setting up the state of emergency is suspect, Mr. Speaker. But still for that, having said so, I want to tell the people of St. Lucia that even if there are 2 St. Lucias, even if one set of people can do whatever they want, another set get arrested by wardens, another set get harassed, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying people of St. Lucia, obey the protocols. Because in the final analysis, St. Lucia doesn't belong to any of us in this room. It doesn't belong to any of us in St. Lucia belongs to the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. So even if there are 2 St. Lucians, and again, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, the police must not be tempted to turn against the people. And I want to say to the people of St. Lucia to listen to the police. Follow the instructions of the police, Mr. Speaker. Do not allow yourself to be tempted, Mr. Speaker. The temptations are going to be alive and kicking. What is happening, Mr. Speaker, is in the endeavor to paint the Labour Party as violent, they are going to be tempting, Mr. Speaker, and using a state of emergency to create that level of temptation, to create a level, to get people agitated so they can say the party is violent. You see the ads, Mr. Speaker. Things that happen in this honorable house, normal occurrences in the honorable house, they have flown, they made big ads, Mr. Speaker, just to give the impression that the Labour Party is violent. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that the state of emergency, our people must be vigilant, our people must understand that they should not allow themselves to be agitated so they can break the law, Mr. Speaker. I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that the purpose for the state of emergency, it is said that the purpose is for COVID. I am saying that you could have the same situation and you could in effect have a curfew, an unwritten curfew, if you had used these 2 sections in the prevention and control of COVID. You could use these two sections, Mr. Speaker, and limit the closing of restaurants and bars, and limit the operations of business spaces. There is a motive, Mr. Speaker, and that is why the state of emergency is being extended. That is why the state of emergency is extended, Mr. Speaker, until October. The longest period it has ever been held from since COVID started, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, when, some time ago I said 4 years was not 40 years. They laughed at me. They laughed. That was a joke, Mr. Speaker. Right now, June the 6th is next month. And in spite of what you do, regardless of how you try to spin things, regardless of the mépris, regardless of the propaganda, the 6th of June will come. And even if you extend the state of emergency up to October, October will come also. It must come, Mr. Speaker. October will come. So you can push it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, right now, under the state of emergency, so many things happen in this country. Mr. Speaker, the government is lost. They use all, and by the way, I want to express my condolences to my friend, Joachim Henry, on the death of his only son, and all, I have not done that before, check your records, on the death of his only son, Mr. Speaker, and all what has befallen on him since that time. Mr. Speaker, I think that the state of emergency is a ploy by the government, using COVID as an excuse to create unnecessary agitation in St. Lucia so that the people of St. Lucia can behave in a way that they do not want to behave. So it can cause a level of conflict. It can cause a level of a country being unstable. And, Mr. Speaker, they can use the normal refrain that the Labour Party is violence. I'll tell you something, that will not happen. The Labour Party that I lead will never get involved in anything of that nature. And we will wait, Mr. Speaker, for the ballot box where the people of St. Lucia can excel and do what has to happen and get this government out of power when the elections are called. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Vieux-Fort South.
Oops. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fundamental question facing this House today is this: whether there is any basis, medical or otherwise, that justifies the extension of this state of emergency as the resolution provides to October 16, 2021. That really is a fundamental question. Is there any justification whatsoever to extend this state of emergency to October 16, 2021? I spent the last couple of days, Mr. Speaker, searching in my mind for the possible reasons that the government could invoke to persuade Parliament, a reluctant opposition, that there is justification for extending the state of emergency to October. Mr. Speaker, whether you appreciate it or not is really irrelevant, frankly, because in making that assessment of the justification of the extension of the state of emergency, we are compelled to take into consideration all factors. Everything that is available to us, everything that is connected to COVID, because the state of emergency is premised, is justified on the existence of COVID. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it must mean that we have to look at what the scientists are saying, what the medical reports are saying, what it tells us. It must mean, Mr. Speaker, that we have to look at the number of persons who have died. What is the potential for further deaths, Mr. Speaker? It must also mean that we have to take into consideration that the next few months, weeks, will be an unusual period in the life of parliamentarians, their constituencies, and the Parliament of St. Lucia. We cannot run away from the fact that in the next few months, while the proposed extension will exist, there will be a general elections in St. Lucia. We therefore have no choice but to make reference to that. We have no choice, Mr. Speaker, but to look at how the vaccinations are going. And I will return to that in a few minutes because I am deeply concerned, deeply worried about the trends that I am seeing. But I shall come to that in a few minutes. We have to look at, Mr. Speaker, the rising tensions in the society. And again, this is not anything that we should pretend that does not exist. There's a lot of disquiet. There's a lot of unhappiness. St. Lucians are challenging COVID officers. They're challenging the police. And there is an increasing mood of disobedience and contest. We can't run away, Mr. Speaker. We can't hide because St. Lucians are becoming as frustrated as anybody else. And I see it every day. The willingness of individuals to take chances, to contest the law, and, of course, to react to the situation. Amidst all of this, Mr. Speaker, we cannot and ignore what is taking place in the world. I mean, what is happening in India, to use a single word, is frightening. It happened before in Brazil, is continuing to happen in Brazil, but for some reason it's a little more remote from us. I don't know whether it has to do with the flow of information or of news from the south to the north, but there's a deep anguish over what is taking place in India because India is so rife with irreconcilable issues, Mr. Speaker. Here you have a country producing most of the AstraZeneca vaccine that you need, happily exporting to other countries, and then finds itself in that disaster, cannot provide its people with sufficient oxygen, now has to rely on AstraZeneca being reshipped to India for different countries. And there's no question that we have had a historical and close relationship with India, so all of us must feel their pain and their anguish. So for me, Mr. Speaker, in approaching this issue of whether we extended this state of emergency, we are compelled to take on board, Mr. Speaker, the compendium of information that is available to us. I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I was startled this morning when the member for Miku South said that the only reason why they need a state of emergency is to impose a curfew. I really frankly couldn't believe what I heard. And I'm being honest, Mr. Speaker, I couldn't believe it, because I said to myself, it just goes to show you sometimes how much you can misread a situation and how much you don't understand a situation. Because what I thought the honourable member would have done this morning in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, is to systematically say, look, we are not out of the woods. Some days we have 13 cases, some days we have 16, some days we have 20, but on average almost 100 cases for the week. We are not out of the woods. This virus is devious. It will find you wherever you are and deal with you. And we cannot say that we are sufficiently secure, that the threat of the pandemic is over, and so out of an abundance of caution, unpopular as an extension of the state of emergency is, but for the sake of security and peace of mind, we're going to leave it in place. And then, of course, but listen to him, Mr. Speaker. You know him? Do you know him, Mr. Speaker? I just a few minutes ago said that his Prime Minister said that the only reason why you're going to introduce a state of emergency is because you need a curfew, and then he's asking what's the difference? But you know, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. No, please, don't stop there, Mr. Speaker. Do not stop him, Mr. Speaker. Because you and I will have a private conversation about his state of mind and his state of being. Now, Mr. Speaker, yes, your state of mind, and you manage yourself well today. I know. Right. Manage yourself very well today. Now, Mr. Speaker, this time the tango will be very rough. We shall come to that, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, the constitutional background has been rehearsed. Reference has been made to that constitutional background. And the leader of the opposition made reference to the fact that the House has to be dissolved by July the 15th, pursuant to Section 55, subsection 2 of the Constitution. And thereafter, that date, Mr. Speaker, Section 56, subsection 1 says that the general election shall be held within 3 months after any dissolution of Parliament, a further 3 months. The question, however, Mr. Speaker, is this. What happens when the House is dissolved? And assuming any possibility of an extension of the dissolution and general elections taking place all the way in October, for argument's sake, and I'm not prescribing, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that there was no need to have a state of emergency to extend to October, because the Constitution does allow the government to recall Parliament during a state of emergency. Look, for example, Mr. Speaker, at what Section 55, subsection 5 says. Look at it, Mr. Speaker. It says, Mr. Speaker, Section 55, subsection 5, if after a dissolution of Parliament and before the holding of a general election of members of the House, the Prime Minister advises the Governor General that owing to the existence of a state of war or of a state of emergency in St. Lucia, it is necessary to recall Parliament. The Governor General shall summon the Parliament that has been dissolved to meet. But unless the life of Parliament is extended under the provision of subsection 3, that doesn't apply, that's a state of war. Of this section, the general election shall proceed and the Parliament that has been recalled shall, if not sooner dissolved, again stand dissolved on the date appointed for the nomination of candidates in the general election. In other words, Mr. Speaker, the government of St. Lucia could have simply have decided extend the state of emergency, assuming that you go through the list of factors which I have identified up to July 31st, and then should anything happen between July 1st and July 31st, ask the Governor General to reconvene because of the state of emergency to deal with any serious outbreak of the COVID pandemic. So, why are we doing this? What is this for? What is this for? Does the evidence disclose that you're in such a crisis that you have to take the route of interfering with the fundamental rights of the citizens of the country for an extended period until October? That is a question. Now, Mr. Speaker, look at what the latest information discloses that we have. And I want honorable members to forgive me because I can't remember all the statistics. In fact, for safety's sake, may I, Mr. Speaker, make reference to it? It's from your favorite news channel, Choice? Yes, I know you have a relationship with Choice.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, a little, exchange with the honorable member on such delicate matters, they have value. Yes, yesterday, new cases 13. Active cases 96, recoveries 4,368, total cases 4,573, total deaths 74. And I want you to look at this, Mr. Speaker. Total vaccinated 24,426. Those are yesterday's figures, Mr. Speaker. And I have already made reference to the issue of whether we have sufficient cases to justify any extension. But I want to focus on one very worrying issue, and that has to do with the vaccinations that should concern every parliamentarian in this House. Every single parliamentarian. It is agreed that herd immunity would be satisfied anywhere if 60 to 70% of the population become vaccinated. That's the figure. And we have hovered in the last few weeks, last 2 weeks for sure, between 23,000 to 24,000, Mr. Speaker. Which means that the rates of penetration of vaccination is in fact quite low. Now, I'm not the greatest mathematician, but if we are talking of a population of say 175,000, and we are talking about 70% the upper figure, then really we should be aiming for herd immunity, meaning that some 119,000 persons or thereabouts, I believe, should get vaccinated. We have a problem. A very, very serious problem, Mr. Speaker. because we are not vaccinating sufficient numbers, and this is a potential recipe for disaster. I don't know, and I can't speak for the personal experiences of every member here, but I can speak for mine in relation to my constituency and those with whom I dialogue. The vast majority of persons I speak to in my constituency tell me bluntly they're not taking the vaccine. And I try my best to comfort them. I say, but why are you not taking the vaccine? I have just had my first shot, and those I've made since, those I've had the opportunity to meet since last Thursday. I've had my second shot. And their response to me is, well, you probably need to take it at your age. I said, that is true for sure, but I can't mix with you as much as I want unless I feel a sense of security. But the truth is, it doesn't mean that because I have taken the vaccine that I can't get COVID from you. I might get a mild version of COVID, but I still could get COVID. And then when you ask them, well, why are you not interested in taking the vaccine? First they tell you there's so much being said about the vaccine. Then they hear about the clots and the reports of the clots, whether it's from Europe or United States or elsewhere. And what I found, Mr. Speaker, even more startling was the fact that one or two persons who have had the first shots are now saying they're not going back to take the second shots because of affairs. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is what I'm trying to bring home to honorable members of Parliament. What we should be focusing on, that the justification, for example, for extending a curfew could have been justified and linked on the basis of what we're going to do to deal with this problem of vaccine resistance, vaccine reluctance that is so rife and so deep throughout the length and breadth of the country. Some have actually told me, Mr. Speaker, that the only time that they will consider taking a vaccine shot is when the Cuban vaccine becomes available. That's the only vaccine that they would trust. Whether they will ever do that, Mr. Speaker, I don't know, but that's the reality. The question then is, how do we deal with the situation? It has been shown that if you're going to coerce people to take vaccines, it will not work. Their resistance will deepen. They will be even more reluctant to cooperate because they would feel, justifiably so, that their fundamental rights have been trampled with. They're being trampled, their right to make decisions for themselves. Although we know that the law gives us the greatest degree of latitude for dealing with non-compliance in public health matters if the public health is in grave danger. What this really means is that we have to fundamentally rethink our approach to this issue. And this is where I thought perhaps there might have been a collective decision or a collective discussion on how we can deal with this looming problem in the society of encouraging St. Lucians to rethink their position. This cannot be done by central command or central direction or central dictate. It has to be done by persuasion. People have to be nudged in trusting officialdom, in trusting the state. It has to be done by nothing else but by persuasion. Because the fundamental question is this: if St. Lucia remains far removed from herd immunity, and we are pushing tourism as we are, particularly we are waiting for this upsurge that is likely to take place in arrivals, because everybody wants to exhale, everybody wants to be out of the prisons that they have been assigned to, Mr. Speaker, for the last few months. Then what would be the reaction if they are coming to a country where few persons are vaccinated and herd immunity does not exist? And this is where I thought this debate should have taken us this morning. This is where I thought that the argument for the extension of the state of emergency would have been premised on the absolute necessities and the absolute steps that we need to take at this time to deal with the situation that we have. That justification, we never had it, Mr. Speaker. The resolution, the presentation of the resolution didn't tell us that that is the reason why any state of emergency should be extended, why such drastic powers should be utilized. All we are told is that the police needed to enforce curfew to make sure people get home at 9 o'clock. That's what we are told, Mr. Speaker. Our approach has to change and change quickly. Persuasion has to be the key approach. We have to admit that the real fears exist, and all of us have seen what has happened in Europe, in UK, and in the United States. When the first talk of clocks came, Mr. Speaker, it was almost as if it was something to be dismissed. The United Kingdom in particular was evasive, although to their credit they stuck to the line that the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages, and they persisted with AstraZeneca. Europe decided the push and start, one time proceeding, next time they stop. Next time they go back to it. Next time they decided certainly only certain age groups are going to get it, not others. In the United States, they haven't touched AstraZeneca because of their alleged stockpiles of Moderna and, of course, the Pfizer vaccine that they have. My point simply, Mr. Speaker, is this, that we have a job in the next few weeks and months to persuade the people of St. Lucia that it is in their collective interest and in their best interest to take the vaccines. And no matter what the difference is between us on this side and that side, we should have had a collective voice and a collective message to deal with the issue. But the example had to be set. You can't come to Parliament and tell people that the only reason that you're going to extend a state of emergency is to get the police to look for them and send them home, enforce a curfew. We have put the public in opposition to the police. People are angry. It's not necessary. And we have to discuss the affairs openly and frankly with the people of St. Lucia on these matters. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm about to close, but let me say this. I made a point earlier on that in a compendium of factors, we can't pretend that we're not dealing with a general elections. We can't deny that, Mr. Speaker. We really can't deny that. But you know, we need to understand that general elections don't belong to the governing party, you know. General elections in the same vein don't belong to the opposition. They don't belong to us. They belong to the people of St. Lucia in the final analysis. because it's the opportunity for them to make their final statement about the future of this country. And really what should have been happening, particularly in this COVID period, even in the light of this so-called extension, that both political parties should have been able to sit together, even under the guidance of independent persons, and agree on the ground rules for the campaign that has to emerge during this period. That's what really should have been happening. Yes, I know sometimes it says that, oh, did you do it? My answer is yes. No matter what may be said. I remember the last general elections when you see we had to amend the legislation, and the leader of the opposition will remember very well that when we had to make adjustments to the legislation, we called in the parliamentary opposition and said, this is what has been recommended and this is what we are proposing to do. As a matter of fact, I remember they wanted us to enact a particular section, to amend the elections legislation for a particular section, and both sides agreed that that can't see the light of day, and we withdrew it, we didn't allow it. And if common rules could be established and understood by both sides, then some of the tension that exists in the country could at least be reduced, if not abated. And it can be done, Mr. Speaker. There is no reason why it can't be done. So, Mr. Speaker, I guess the die is cast, to use my words on another occasion, and we'll have to live with this resolution as it is. But I also believe that a different approach could have been taken by a more sensitive recognition of the parameters of the Constitution of our country. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Vieux-Fort.
Who? Mike?
Vieux-Fort now.
When you go to see your friend Mike?
That line. Oh. And let's take lunch. Yeah, let's.
Speaker, I beg that we suspend the House for an hour for lunch, come back at 10 to 2.
Honourable members, the question is that the House do stand suspended for the next hour. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
We have just seen the morning session of the sitting of the House of Assembly coming to an end. This morning, coming into the afternoon, we saw the Prime Minister, Honorable Alan Chastanet, tabling the motion for Parliament to further extend the state of emergency. And the proposed extension is for an additional period of 5 months commencing from the 17th of May 2021 and ending on the 16th day of October 2021 in accordance with the legislation. Papers were also laid by the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, as well as a statement was made by the Economic Development Minister, Honorable Guy Joseph, also the parliamentary representative for Castries Southeast. But the debate with respect to the motion ensued, and we did hear contributions coming from the opposition in the Honourable House making their concerns known. And of course, after this lunch, which has been put in place for the next hour. After the lunch is done, we will hear the continuation of the debate surrounding this motion in Parliament to further extend the state of emergency. And just to let you know, we have had the state of emergency for some time. We are under a state of emergency right now, and it will be expiring on the 16th of May 2021. In his address, the Prime Minister did indicate that the argument remains the same. And while we have noted significant strides with respect to the COVID-19 response, most significantly the introduction of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, large volumes of the vaccine coming in to be able to inoculate upwards of 24, almost 25,000 individuals to date, with the first jab and the second jab almost 5,000 individuals to date. There still continues to be concern with respect to the coronavirus. And leading the argument was the hope that we can continue to guide individuals with the institution of the curfew, which is based on the advice coming from the Ministry of Health's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sharon Belmar-George. And so, as I mentioned, the debates will continue after this lunch break, and we invite you to stay tuned for the proceedings after lunch. This is the sitting of the House of Assembly for today, Tuesday, the 4th of May, 2021. Stay tuned. We go back to studio at this time.